Hi everyone, we're coming to you live on Facebook. I'm Ashley, Education Developer for Blick Art Materials. We're really excited to present to you this very special watercolor painting demonstration. We're going to be using Daniel Smith Artist Watercolors on a 300-pound Arches watercolor block. And we're going to be painting using Princeton's new Aqua Elite watercolor brushes. We're also going to incorporate a little bit of pen and ink using Micron pens. So to get started, before we get into our demonstration, I want to remind everyone that we are, of course, doing a giveaway this evening for a free $100 Blick e-gift card. And you can be eligible to win that gift card. All you have to do is like this post, like our page, and follow us on Facebook. And then answer this one question that we have for you, which is, what's your favorite color? Very simple question, but sometimes can be tough to answer. I know I have a couple of favorite colors: blue, teal, purple, anything in the cool range almost. So what are your favorite colors? Let us know in the chat, and we will be announcing the winner at the end of our demonstration this evening. Also, you can find all the products that I'm using here this evening, as well as a bonus reference image that you can use to make your own watercolor painting using the products that you see here. So click the link in our post and you'll be taken right to that bundle page where you can find all of these wonderful products. We're going to be using a combination of watercolor painting techniques, from drawing to wet and wet painting to wet and dry painting. And I'll show you some of the different effects that you can get through using those various techniques. Let's go ahead and get started. So back to our 300-pound watercolor block by Arches. This is a cold press watercolor block, and it's a very heavyweight paper. So it's going to hold a lot more water than your typical 140-pound. It comes on a block, which means it's basically pre-stretched. So as long as you're working on it attached to the block, you don't need to stretch your paper or do anything else, really. So I'm going to go ahead and start right here. I've made a sketch of the image in our reference photo, and I've taken some time to observe the colors that I see so that I can plan out ahead of time and test the various washes that I want to use and kind of map out how I'm going to put this painting together with the colors that I have. So I've made that quick sketch with an HB pencil or any pencil that you have on hand that doesn't draw too dark for you. And we talked about incorporating an inking process. This is something that watercolor artists can do to help bring out some of the best aspects of your line drawing and to help keep that drawing in place as you work and build on multiple layers of watercolor washes like we're going to be doing here shortly. So there are a couple different sizes that you're going to find in the set on the bundle page, so don't forget to check that out. We have an 03, an 05, and an 08 pen option here. So basically what that means, what that's going to mean for you is the 08 has a thicker nib than the 03 and the 05. So as you go up in number, that gauge gets a little bit wider. So I'm going to show you those different line variations that you can get from this pen set, and then you can make some informed choices about how you want to deal with that. So the 03, and I'm just going over some of these basic elements. As you can see, it's not a huge impact, but it's just enough to make it look like you know, a typical pen sketch. And maybe this is enough for you. But maybe you want to incorporate some variation. I want to show you, and just quickly, and then we'll get started on our watercolor washes, just the quick difference between the 03, the 05. So this is a little more of a solid line. It doesn't fight with the texture of the paper as much as the 03 because it is a thicker nib. Okay, so a little more solid line for you there. Okay, and then lastly, I'm going to show you the 08. And this is totally up to you how you want to handle it. Okay, so the larger the drawing nib, the darker your ink looks and the wider the line. Okay, so I'm going to proceed with inking this drawing just using the 08 because it's going to go quickly for me and I'm going to get that dark outline. So this is kind of the prepping part. It's important to have a solid drawing that you're working with. Some people like to paint watercolor without drawing first, but I wanted to demonstrate that when you're working with an image that looks as complex as this one, the drawing process can really help you to keep things completely clear as you work. And I'm just going to go quickly because we want to get to the painting. So don't forget, if you have any questions or comments, let us know in the chat. We're going to be answering questions here live directly in the comments. So let us know what your questions are about the Arches watercolor blocks or watercolor paper options in general. Or maybe you have questions about the Daniel Smith watercolors that we'll be getting to. So let us know. And if you're just joining us or you've been with us since the beginning, we are giving away a $100 Blick e-gift card, which is an excellent opportunity to enter and win. And it's incredibly easy to become eligible. Just let us know in the comments, answer us this one question. What is your favorite color? It sounds like an easy one, but sometimes it can be tough to answer. And then don't forget to like this post, like our page, and follow us. And you could be the next winner of our e-gift card. And we'll be announcing that winner in the chat at the end of this presentation. And while you're watching, don't forget to step over to our bundle page because I wouldn't want you to miss the opportunity to print out this beautiful reference photo that you can use as a guide for your own watercolor painting. All right. Here's our Monstera Leaf, which becomes the center of attention almost. And if you're familiar with painting foliage, great. If you're not, and you're thinking about how to approach drawing a leaf, my best advice to you is to draw the ribs of the leaf first, and then draw the leaves around it. Because you're going to establish that shape a lot more quickly if you know the direction that the veins are going in. So that's just my little tip, because foliage is so beautiful in watercolor that we wouldn't want to miss an opportunity to divulge that info. All right, just quickly. And this image has a lot of great lines in it. So I'm really taking advantage of the angles that are being provided here. Just a reminder, this is the 08 micron, and it's giving me really great coverage without drying out quickly, which is something that can be frustrating when you're working with a pen. These little lines I'm creating here, these spider-like lines, are representative of the foliage that we're going to be painting. So here I just have a bare bones image. So when you're breaking this down and you see all these little leaves and flowers, don't get overwhelmed thinking that you have to draw every single one. Really, you want to draw in the branches because it's going to give you a wire framework in your drawing that you can build your washes around. See how quick that was? All right, so that ink is going to stay in place because it's permanent. So when we go ahead and apply color, it's not going to run. So let's get started with these Daniel Smith watercolors. I have a variety of colors, including primary and the PrimaTek. Now the PrimaTek we talked about have true gemstones incorporated directly into the paint. So for example, when you use the amethyst, you'll have a little bit of that sparkle and shine. So we're going to demonstrate that, but I want to start off with just some basic washes here. So from that PrimaTek set, I'm going to use the Hematite, which is basically a brown, neutral brown. And we have Hematite, which is a black. And I know ahead of time, because I've used these, that I'm going to have a little bit of sediment. So I think it's good when you're testing out new colors, especially just to test those out and see how they're going to work, because sometimes these colors can read differently when you put them down, and they're very exciting to work with, but they are different than your typical watercolor. All right, so let's see. I've got the PrimaTek, Hematite, and Jadeite from the PrimaTek set, and now I'm going to squeeze out some of this French ultramarine blue for our sky and to make cool shadows. And I'm going to bring out a little bit of this Hansa yellow light so that I can make a bright green using my Jadeite and French ultramarine blue to go along with. Last color that we need is for our blue door, and that's going to be your phthalo blue green shade. And when I'm looking at this reference image that you can print out on the bundle page, totally free bonus for you, I can see that this is a phthalo blue green shade, and it's going to work really well with this photo because of all the greens that are incorporated into it. So I want to stick with a color that's going to be more harmonious with the rest of the palette. So I'm using this round flower well palette, which I think is ideal for watercolors, and I have a clean water trick that I always like to use and I'm going to share with you, and that's to use a dropper to administer water in approximately a 1:10 ratio, 1:5 even, if you're testing out the intensity of your washes, say on another sheet of watercolor paper or something like that. And basically this keeps you from having to dip your brush over and over in your paints and back in your water. So really you're conserving water and you're conserving paint in the process. And let's see, I've got one more line. All right. Now we talked about using a wet and wet technique as well as a wet and dry technique. So let's start with the wet and wet technique. That means that I'm going to apply a wet watercolor onto a wet watercolor painting surface. So I'm going to show you how we do that. You're going to want a clean brush, and this is a 6 round Aqua Elite. And this is super easy. You know, wet into wet and dry into, or wet into dry techniques get people thinking all over the place. What does that mean? Well, all you're doing is you're going to paint on clean water, as long as it is clean. It might get a little darker as we keep working, but we'll try to keep that water as clean as possible. Paint in clean water, and now we talked about using the phthalo blue green shade. I'm going to go to my palette, and I'm going to mix up my phthalo blue green shade. And I want to make sure that it's fully mixed. I don't like those little watercolor chunks that come out, and that's pretty intense. We could add a little bit more water. Test out your wash every time you use it. Now, this is all we do. You can see the wet watercolor on the area where we painted clean water, do a nice, it almost looks like it's kind of, bleeding, and that's what you want. This is the way to cover large areas quickly, okay, as opposed to going in on a dry piece of paper and applying, one individual brush stroke at a time. Okay, so you're going to cover larger areas with this technique. Also, in watercolor, we like to leave white for a highlight. So as you're working here, you're going to leave a little bit of a touch of white in various places. Okay, now I'm going to continue, and I've got a little bit, that's fine. I've got a little bit of that color coming over, and that's fine. It's fine for areas where you want that color to go, but if you don't want that color to go there, then you can work on being very precise with your application, and it will help you. So, this is delightfully easy wet into wet watercolor painting. Now let's apply that to our entire background surface. All right? So I'm going to keep painting this door. And I can adjust the intensity of the colors as I go. So what's going to happen is this first layer will dry, and we'll see that the color intensity will lessen as it dries. So if you think it's very bright when you go to apply your color, and I'm working this in between the leaves because it makes it a little more believable. All right. So back to what we were talking about before. Your color will be a little less intense. You'll see how much more color at that point you'll need to be adding in. All right, so how easy was that? Now, let's just do, let's demonstrate a different color because I do want to show you the Hematite. Which is from our PrimaTek set. So I'm going to paint right inside this little window area. And I'm going to go back to applying that clean water. All right, now let's go to our Hematite. And these colors will work together, so you don't have to worry about intermixability just because they are using the gemstone mineral component. So I'm not sure how well you can see this on the camera, but the sediment from the hematite settles into the tooth of the cold press watercolor paper. And it gives you this really nice graininess that has a perfect texture for the area that we're covering. So that's even coverage. Now, if you want to darken an area, I'm just going to load up my brush with more color and I'm going to drop it in where I want that shading to go. So this is a wet into wet technique for shading. It doesn't have to be a lot. Look how nicely that space gives us that shading. Okay, so let's do that for the other window here. And I think what's so interesting about this painting is that it feels like a complex image when you start, but when you break it down into some simple steps like we have here, it can become very easy to break down and work with in a step-by-step process. All right, so this is the Hematite, and this will come in that PrimaTek set that you can find on our bundle page, where you'll also find our reference image. All right, so just that little bit of shading. And my pen, my drawing, is holding up really nicely. All right, so let's do a couple more colors using this wet and wet technique that we now have in our back pocket. I'm going to tackle this foliage just quickly. And I'm going to go back to painting in clean water. And notice that I'm not painting that clean water all over my surface. I'm literally only painting it in the leaves that I'm going to be painting. And you do have to be careful that some of your clean wash doesn't dry too quickly. So timing is of the essence. So I've got some clean water painted on there. And I'm just going to mix up a little bit of this. And I'm gonna, I want a bright green. So I mixed my Jadeite with my Hansa Yellow Light. And I want to start with this as a light color first because I can always build on the darker colors. And again, how quickly we can apply a lot of color. And don't forget to leave a little bit of white. For your highlights. All right, let's get that painted in the rest of the way. I also like to have a paper towel when I'm watercolor painting. You might not see it on your view there, but it helps me to test washes and keep my brush clean in between layers. So if you are a watercolor painter or a beginner, these are all good rules of thumb. I think we could all agree. Clean water is essential. Great. I'm just going to wrap this up. And don't forget, we are giving away a $100 Blick e-gift card. All you have to do is respond to our giveaway question in the chat, which is, what's your favorite color? I have many favorite colors, and maybe you do too. Let us know, and then don't forget to like this post, like our page, and follow us on Facebook. All right. So let's do a couple more areas before we move on to our second layer, where you can see how all of these washes are going to dry. Oh, look, and I've got a little bit of bleeding. Okay, so this is when you have a little too much water. It's a teachable moment. It's a little too much water, and my wash is going to become difficult to control. And that's because when I applied my hematite, it ran into my other area. So heating those drying times are important, but that's okay. I'm able to just patch it up. All right, couple more things before we move on. The shingles here, I want to show you quickly how to deal with these and get a great highlight. So we're going to use the same technique, and we're going to just paint in just a little bit here. I'm going to show you. I'm using the Hematite, which is a brown color for all intents and purposes. And I don't always use my watercolors right out of the tube. However, Daniel Smith has such a plethora of color options that you almost could get through your painting without necessarily having to always mix down your colors. So with this process, and you can just paint loose, you can paint wet into wet, or you can paint right down on it. But leaving this highlight makes these shingles a lot more believable. So, and it's just a simple like this. So it's a simple outline following your drawing, and you look at something like this and you think, how do I tackle the shape? How do I draw that? Well, all we're doing is drawing the angle of the shingle and a curved edge where it meets. I've kind of abandoned my wet into wet technique, which is fine. I can dilute my wash. I think on smaller areas, wet into wet is slightly less important because how we talked about, it's great for covering large areas quickly. But here, you could do either way. So I'm kind of showing you both. Now, we can keep going here. Actually, we're almost done with this. Now, don't forget, if you have any questions or comments about the products that we're using here today, we are live in the chat to answer all of your questions, as many as we can, as quickly as possible while we're still here, so that we can make sure that, that we have gotten you the information that you need. All right, now you can also quickly paint in these connectors that kind of run under the roof. Okay. A couple of other components that we have in this drawing are the branches. I like to give them a little bit of attention just so that I don't forget about it. And then I can build on that as we go. Okay, I'm going to quickly demonstrate one last technique that's very exciting for when we go to put in our foliage. Two last things. We'll get there. All right, for our background, and I'm trying to think about drying times. If we want to do the background first, let's do this. Let's build in this little landing. I'm using clean water. Okay. Lots of clean water. And then let's use that PrimaTek. Let's cover this big area all at once. See how fast you can work. And that's really how we can make these complex images a lot more doable. Perfect. All right, now let's put in a little bit of sky blue color. And it's one of those questions, how do I paint the sky? And it can be really easy. So I've painted in a clean wash, and I'm staying away from where I've painted the shingles because I want to allow a little more room. Now I'm taking my French ultramarine blue and I'm just going to dot it in. Okay, and it just is simple. Simple coverage there. All right, now moving quickly onto our foliage, we have big areas that we want to cover. So let's paint in a wash. I'm going to work quickly. I'm going to go back to that bright green and I'm going to work that in. because this is where I'm going to have those hanging vines and that foliage draping through. It even kind of goes into the windows there. And we can, there we go. Now I've got a little bit of wash that I'm working with there. Let's do that on the other side because we have more vines and flowers, and these loose florals we're not going to pick apart just yet. We're going to wait until we have our atmospheric background worked in. Okay, great. And this is just a light wash. Okay, you're going to continue to apply these processes to all of these areas. Make sure you're minding those drying times. Remember, it's going to lighten as we work. So I'm going to let this dry, and then we're going to move on to our next step. I'll show you what we're working toward. Okay, now I have just mounted the 300-pound watercolor paper onto a 1/2-inch foam core board that I've cut to size. All right, and then I've used just some white artist tape to adhere that with a 1/2-inch border. This is something you don't have to do if you want to stay working on the block, but if you want to go back into it, if you want to start a new painting on that block, you can remove the paper, and this is just a DIY watercolor board. Of course, we have watercolor boards for stretching as well. Please do check those out, but if you want a quick fix, this is something I like to do that's temporary. Now, once you have this layer worked in, something exciting that we're going to do is we're going to add in these areas where our flowers are going to go, and we're going to paint loose florals. So in my second palette here, where I'm exploring those additional layers, I'm adding the Pure Scarlet for the red flowers on top, and then I'm going to use this wonderful Amethyst Genuine for the flowers, the purple flowers that we find on top and bottom. I'm going to apply our same concept of wet and wet. Of course, now that it's dry, we have a lot less worries, right? So I'm going to paint this in. I'm going to make my wash. Let's use our round for this. Make sure that that wash is incorporated. Now, the Pure Scarlet is an incredibly vibrant and intense color. So a little goes a long way, I have found. So if you feel like you want to dilute this color a little extra, be my guest. It will probably be to your benefit because it is so rich and intense. Now I'm just going to drop in my color. And this is just a background that's going to lighten as it dries. Now I want to show you another technique for watercolor artists, and that's called lifting. So if you want to add, handy paper towels, if you want to add a little bit more realistic texture, or you want to just lift paint up, period, take something dry and absorbent like a paper towel or a clean watercolor brush and just lift that color right up. Because we don't need it to be so intense, we just want it to be enough. And here you can also use a quinacridone. It doesn't have to be Pure. Any rosy color will do. Now I'm going to add in these purple flower areas using this technique, making my wash with Amethyst. Making sure it's fully mixed, and then dropping that color in. And then I can lift, because we just want it to be subtle. can even blend that in. This is a 1/2 inch wash. Excellent for covering large areas and things of that nature. I think we even have a little bit of that. So anywhere that you foresee those flowers going, a little bit of background, a little bit of background. Okay, great. Now, the other part of this is just to saturate those colors in those bright color areas. This is the easy part. We don't have to do any wet and wet technique. We're going to do a wet and dry technique, which is what basically is going to take the color to the next level. Once you get that initial color layer applied, you've primed your paper for the next layer of color. Look how intense and bright and beautiful this phthalo blue is in its second layer, leaving an opportunity for even more highlights and texture to make this door charming. Remember, it will lighten as it dries. And don't forget these little places in between. Help you add that texture. Now, could I be doing another wet and wet layer? Of course. However you want to saturate your color in terms of technique is totally up to you. Now, as I continue to build these layers, we can see a little bit of that lightening. Don't want to bleed too much. As you continue to saturate layers, you'll be able to tell, where is a good stopping point. Okay? Now let's work those branches back in. I'm going back to my Hematite, and we talked about making sure that these vines really have a place. And I love how they overlap some of these other areas. We could also paint them in with green. I like to do both because I think it's a little more accurate. That's up to you. And again, going back to how well that drawing is holding up with the micron pen. This might still be a little wet up here, but a little bit's okay. All right. This is still a little wet. I'm not going to mess with it too much. A little bit of that atmospheric is nice. All right. We can do the same thing here. We're just darkening and enunciating. I guess that's a funny word. We're bringing out the sharpest qualities of the drawing. Okay, now I want to help save on time, so I'm going to quickly move through these next couple parts of the process. And while I'm doing that, just a reminder that we are giving away a free gift card, a $100 Blick e-gift card that you can be eligible to win if you let us know in the comments what is your favorite color. And don't forget to like our post and our page and follow us. And go check out the bundle page where you can find this reference image so that you can make your own watercolor painting with a quick, easy start guide. Okay, so that covers our wet and dry technique. Obviously, I want to keep painting on this surface, leaving highlight areas. And it's not perfect, and the reason that I'm not trying to make it too perfect is because that drawing is holding everything up for me. Okay, let's quickly move on. One last thing, if you want to darken these shaded areas, get that wash back on, just like we did before. Back to your PrimaTek. Notice how the PrimaTek has almost a color separation that's giving us a really neat shading for this area in particular. And so we can darken that shading, okay? And here in our background, let's just make a really subtle, cool shadow, just to fill in that space. All right, now we're gonna move on to our last layer. So these are our final moments of the painting, and hopefully you've been sticking with us this whole time and picking up some quick and easy watercolor tips using wet into wet technique and wet into dry technique. And hopefully you've checked out our bundle page. Just click the link. You'll find all the resources and how to when you go there. So for our last layer, we just want to top off the details. And the most exciting part about this layer to me are the loose florals, so and loose foliage. So I want to kick off with that, knowing that the more you work this painting and the more you work the process and the more time and consideration that you give to it, the closer you're going to get to that final master painting. So I'm going to be using the same colors. Obviously, there are a lot of choices, and those choices are totally yours. But for this, I'm going to go back to my Pure Scarlet. I want to show you a couple of quick, loose floral brush strokes to make these flowers very, very doable. And to me, everything almost ends up in a heart shape with these mark making processes. I'm just taking my brush and I'm just making this like little V shape with two little marks that go right next to each other. And it's just enough, and sometimes they have three. It's just enough info, and I can work them along the branches. And you'll see as we fill in this information with our wet into dry technique, that the branch starts to look very natural. It gives us a framework to build on so that these other details fall into the background. Now, if you're a hardcore watercolor painter, I do want to give a shout out to the Princeton Aqua Elite watercolor brushes. This is a performance brush with an excellent snapback that holds a lot of water. So as you can see, we've really put those brushes to work here. My essential watercolor brush kit includes a 1/2 inch wash and a number 6 round, no matter what. So to me, with any painting challenge that is presented in watercolor, if I have those two shapes, I know I'm going to get the job done. So that round 6 and that 1/2 inch wash. Okay, so we can keep going, but I want to show you the purple Morning Glory flower loose floral brush stroke as well. I'm going to go to my Amethyst, my exciting Amethyst color. And I'm just going to, I'm looking at this and I notice that they're just a little round shape, and we're just gonna go with that. And it's very simple. It's not an overcomplicated flower. It's just enough to give you the idea. And then we can put a little yellow or white center in the middle of it there. So just round brush strokes. Now, these might look a little like grapes to you before we put our loose foliage in. So I want to show you this technique for foliage that I think you're going to love. And so let's get a couple more of these in here. I know we've got some that end up here. This kind of detail makes it believable, right? And we're building them around the vines because we know that morning glories have all these wonderful vines. Okay, so take that to the nth degree, as many florals as you can work in. And I'm still using this round 6 watercolor brush, so look how far we're getting here. Now, for your foliage, same technique, wet into dry, and we're gonna make a little heart shape with a vine, and it's so much fun. So let me just show you here. A little heart shape, leave a little shading, and a vine. Okay, let's do it over here. A little heart shape, an actual, just simple heart shape and a vine. Now the more you fill that in, the more you have the atmosphere, and look, it could even be a half leaf with a vine. We can go over our vines with a little bit of green. We can add the vine to the purple flowers. And then we start to build this thickness, right? I can also go back over my foliage and add these shaded areas. And see how, even though we're not trying to be perfect edge to edge, we're still getting that nice detail. Our drawing is holding up. Now, when I draw and paint, an easy way to get that shading and detail is to practice this one method, which is to darken the edges. Anywhere that your lines meet in a drawing or a painting, if you darken the areas where objects intersect, or start or finish, so to speak, that's where you want your shading to go. And I'll demonstrate that quickly. So here at the tips of my leaves, I'm going to darken those areas. So I don't have to paint every detail, but if I rely on this little rule of thumb, I can bring out some of the best details of my artwork. Now you have one last chance to enter for our free $100 Blick e-gift card. We're going to be commenting the winner in the chat. So don't forget to let us know, what's your favorite color? Like our post, like our page, and follow us. And go check out that bundle page where you can find all the products that we used here today, including this reference photo. And remember, when you're painting with watercolor, final thought, let those layers dry in between using your wet into wet technique and wet into dry technique. Because by utilizing your drying times, you're allowing for various levels of color saturation, and you're able to fill in larger areas at once. These last layers are all about the detail and punching up that color. So the more you do that, the more you're going to get that final result that you want. And we can punch this up. We can add some great texture. All right. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. keep working on those watercolor techniques and keep working on that painting. And you'll find those essential tools for your watercolor toolkit and a reference photo at our bundle page. We'll be commenting the winner of our giveaway this evening in the chat, and we sincerely hope that you join us on Thursday at 4 p.m. for our next Facebook Live. We'll see you there.